Thanks for checking out another sermon from the Internet's Church of Metal, Rockin' Metal Revival. You can download the entire show at rmrshow.com or check out this highlight from the latest RMR.
From the CD Alien Love Secrets, there is Die to Live from Mr. Steve Vai. And Andy, you've been after me to get an interview with Steve Vai for over a year now, and
I'm grinning from ear to ear right now.
You are right now, because on the phone with us, none other than Steve Vai. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Steve, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
To start right off, I mean, everybody knows, I'm sure, and if they don't, they're going to find out right now. You go back to the days of playing with Frank Zappa, and I was reading up. I didn't know this myself until just today, actually, but you first got in touch with him through sending him a transcription of one of his own songs?
Yep.
So how did that pan out, that you just sent it to him and he auditioned you? How did that work, that you got the gig?
It was very interesting. When I was younger, I was I was very much into, my parents were listening to like West Side Story, so I really liked, orchestral sounding things that had attitude and intensity and all this stuff. But I was really a teenager in the 70s and into like Led Zeppelin and Queen and Jethro Tull and all, Aerosmith. So when I heard Frank's music, he really bridged the gap between a lot of that stuff, So I fell, madly in love with his music. And it was funny because a friend of mine was in a studio in New York, and he stole the Rolodex. And he's like, hey, man, look at all these phone numbers I got. I got Mick Jagger, and I got, Rod Stewart. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, And then he gets to the Z's, and he goes, and look, Frank Zappa. And I went, you've got Frank Zappa's phone number, his home phone number? And I didn't believe it was his home phone number, but it was.
How about that?
And I waited until it took me a couple of years to muster up the courage to call. And the first time I called, he wasn't there. But his wife was very nice. And I called a couple of times in a few years. But then when I was at Berkeley and I was 18, and there was that fateful day where I actually got him on the phone, and he was in a good mood. And he said, I said, I really love your music. I'm just a fan, and, I'm a guitar player. And then he started to talk, and he said, well, you can send me a tape of your playing. And I had some scores from the Boston Public Library of Edgar Varese music that he didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put this package together, and I had transcribed. I loved transcribing, which is you listen to music and then you write it down.
Right. Yep.
In manuscript form. And he had this one piece called The Black Page, which was just like this intensely complex rhythmical piece of music. And I had transcribed it. And I sent it to him, and it was close enough to where he took notice. And he actually liked my guitar playing and thought of auditioning me for the band, but then when I told him I was 18, he said, forget it. But I didn't forget it. And he put me on salary transcribing music, so I started doing all these great guitar solos and drums, drum charts and all this stuff. And then when I moved out to California when I was 20, I joined the band.
Wow. Steve, the first time I ever got to see you play was when you had joined up with David Lee Roth, and you were playing with Billy Sheehan. Do you miss doing that kind of gig at all, or are you more happy doing your own solo work?
Well, I'm usually very content with whatever I had done at the time, and then I move on. I move on from one project to another for a reason, just like anybody. And I don't pine for the days of yore.
Mm-hmm.
I cherish those memories because they're treasures.
Right.
Touring back then in those days in the '80s, with a band like that, and it was just amazing. God, I was 25 years old, and playing 20 to 30,000 people a night, and 80% of the audience was teenage girls in their underwear.
How do you beat that, huh?
So, but, I knew that it was all fleeting, and it wasn't the kind of thing I wanted to, make a living out of, because I had this other music in my head that I wanted to, explore. So, we don't have, my audience is now, 99%, young boys that are interested in playing the guitar.
True. But
not necessarily, but yeah, about that.
If the right circumstances would present themselves again and, another one of these super groups came along, would it be something you might be interested in later in down the road?
Well, I'd never say never, but I'm not looking for anything like that. I did all that.
Yeah.
I look at it like this, and this may sound pretentious, but I have a lot of, musical aspirations and desires for projects that I really would like to get to. And I have far too many to do, for one lifetime. Probably enough for 5 lifetimes. So you got to be really careful with your time and prioritize. And there's nobody that can make a Steve Vai record but me,
Oh, sure.
Just like there's nobody that can make an Elton John record or a Metallica record. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I'm not so compelled to go and join a group and collaborate because there's so much stuff I'd like to do. Having said that, if the right situation came along, I might try it for a season, but
right.
I don't know.
Then move on. I wouldn't call that pretentious at all. I mean, obviously you've got a wealth of music floating around in you. Why not get it out there?
Yep. It's like a curse and a blessing.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah. Now, you mentioned all these other projects you have and everything like that. One I wanted to ask you about is the Naked Tracks set. How did that all come about?
Well, a lot of the stuff that I do, the ideas that I come up with, can take a long time to come to fruition. But I am very patient, and I love doing things that have sort of like a long-term project goal. And I remember when I was recording my first record, and I thought I should do mixes, of these tracks without the lead guitars so that, I can play along with them. And one day, maybe create a compilation where other people could play along too. And as it turned out, that one day came along, which was last year or this year. And I did it. I took most of the bulk of my catalog that are the instrumental guitar tracks, and I took the naked mixes, which are like karaoke Vai tracks.
Right. Yeah.
Which they're just really great, rich tracks to play to. There's 5 CDs worth of material in this naked box set. And it's really great because, if you're sitting at home and you don't have a band at that time and you want to just jam on and on and on and on, you take one of these things and you can loop certain sections and you can just play through it. And you don't have to play what I played, But they're very highly produced and rich-sounding tracks. I did all the work for you. And if you're an instrumentalist, it's just great to kind of sit back and motor away.
So those do come as a set then, or are they single?
You can get them as a set, or you can go online and buy them separately.
Oh. Yeah, that's something I haven't gotten my hands on yet, but I surely will, because that's something I'd sit to love and do.
Yeah, it's a beautiful package, and what's interesting is even if you're not a fan of, playing your instrument over them, I've talked to people who are fascinated in hearing what the tracks, the beds, sound like that I created for the guitar. So,
again, I think it's a wonderful idea. I'm sure all the guitar players that have gotten their hands on them so far are loving it. I know I will as soon as I pick it up. And for something like that, I'm sure we all...
There you are, another sermon from Rockin' Metal Revival. The RMR is a 3-hour hard rock heavy metal show that can be heard anytime at rmrshow.com.